Redgate!
Cheers, Hamish. Cheers, guys. Hey, first of all, thanks for everyone and Redgate for having me here at the New Stars of Data conference. Really chuffed to actually be one of the first presenters at this. So I guess for this session, I guess I really want to kind of make it a bit fluid. So like Hamish said, if you've got any questions along the way, just pop them out and I can take the questions as we go, or we can have the questions at the end. So I'm pretty free on that. So I guess first of all is I'll just give a quick briefing around, I guess, what my current role is. So I work at Genesis Energy as a data engineering chapter lead. So obviously they're based in New Zealand, so that's the southern hemisphere next to Australia. It is 8 p.m. On our side here. You can see me, I was having a coffee earlier, but that was actually more of a night coffee there. So in the data quickly on Genesis is that we're one of the biggest gen retailers in New Zealand. So what that means is that not only do we sell electricity back to the market, we also generate electricity. So for those, I guess, Kiwis online, you probably know around the Huntly Power Station. And there's a few water plants and windmills like YPP windmills that's across the country that is owned by Genesis. Cool. So I guess that brings the introduction. So I guess quickly walk you guys through what you are expecting in this session here. So again, talking about data and change. Look, it's going to be, I got the chaotic gender. It's probably not too chaotic as it sounds, but look, I try to add some, like I said, Power BI in there as well. And I guess it's more about sharing with, I guess, you guys, whether you're across like the start of your career journey or you're kind of really deciding whether you want to go into data, kind of shedding some light around how I kind of got into the data space, because I think I've actually gone through some changes, which I'll share with you guys a little bit later. Cool. So before we go on, I'll just quickly exit that and I'll show you a quick Power BI report. It's very simplistic. So I guess a bit of a change. What is change? It's just going to do some graphics here. It's not linear. And it's not radial. For me, it's been a bit of a chaos. So I'll give you guys a bit of a run through in terms of my journey, how I got started in terms of career, actually not in data, and I guess how I progressed through data, and now I guess chapter lead, and I guess what next. And like I said, questions if you guys have, just feel free to put the hands up, and I guess Hamish will stop me or give me a quick buzz if there's a question I can answer that, or we can answer at the end. So I guess if you guys see this line, it's a radial chart here. So obviously I've split my journey a bit in terms of particular segments. So back in 2009, so that's donkey years ago. So initially I was actually training up to be a pharmacist. So obviously in New Zealand, the pharmacy degree is for 4 years. And as part of that journey at the last year, you have an intern exam. And so that was 2009 was when I was wrapping up with my pharmacy degree. And I guess that was more heavily focused on dispensing of medicines, learning around medicine efficacy, learning about vaccines, which we probably all know a little bit more right now, and yeah, more on the kind of the medicine and the pharmaceutical world. From that, after the 4 years, so I was in pharmacy as a qualified pharmacist for 3 years. So as part of that role, obviously I've been working in a little tiny chemist out west. For those Kiwis online, it's out west in Linfield. So it was a really tiny pharmacy. And obviously it's very retail based, and you build this really great relationship with the customer base and the patients. And you really kind of get to know the patients as well. And that was like 6 days a week of work, dispensing medicines, making sure that once you receive the prescription from the doctors, you validate and you check the medicine and the dosing, and making sure everything is like won't really harm anyone. And obviously counseling is one of the big things in there, counseling to the patients around how to use medicines. I guess one of the things in pharmacy, how I probably jump out a little bit, is how I got into pharmacy was, I guess it's kind of like through high school, I kind of thought that, hey, look, chemistry was something that was quite interesting. Not in particular medicine and I guess pharmaceutical, but it was more kind of the chemistry aspect. Because one of the big things in pharmacy is the kind of chemical reactions and how medicines work. So I guess that was kind of like a natural kind of tangent when I went, oh, hey, look, pharmacy was kind of quite interesting. But I guess it wasn't until that I started the 3-year journey into pharmacy that I realized that, hey, look, it's actually a little bit different to how I had anticipated. It was kind of until kind of into the 3rd year over here that I started realizing that, hey, look, what do I really like, and what do I really enjoy? And it's kind of like just subconsciously that I start thinking about, right, what's it in for me going further? Can I imagine myself in this career for another 5 or 10 years? And I guess it was kind of like you kind of have that warm fuzzies, and you kind of feel that, right, hey, look, this is probably not, it's probably a time for me to actually think elsewhere. So what had happened was that it was actually quite, I felt it was actually quite just an overnight decision, I think. But it's kind of like I kind of had that niggly feeling for some time to say, hey, maybe it's time for some sort of change. But I guess I told at that time and spoke with a lovely boss, and I said, hey, look, I'm really wanting to plan for the next chapter of my life in my career, and he was supportive. Obviously, to be honest, at that time, I didn't really know what was the next step. It was kind of like it was very much like a lotto. I was trying to shoot in the darkness, and I didn't really know what was the next step. So what had happened was that I actually took a gap year. You kind of see the gap year over here. So I think for me, the gap year was really important. This kind of made me, I didn't plan out any of that. So it was actually around about 8 months when I had to do a lot of thinking and planning what to do next. So there was a lot of things where I was thinking about, I did some like locum pharmacy jobs there and that, more like part-time. And actually what I realized was actually I started thinking about, hey, maybe actually going back to uni will be something that's quite key. And that's probably something on my roadmap. At that particular time, I really wanted to work on my strengths. So I guess the strengths at that time was in the pharmaceutical field. So at that time, I decided, hey, look, after also talking to quite a few good mates that was more on the statistical side, they recommended, hey, look, if you got some interest in data, why don't you look at something like a statistics degree? So at then, I was like, hey, that looks a bit interesting. So started kind of really exploring the options there, and actually started talking to and looking into the course provided by some of the universities in Auckland for statistics, and was lucky to actually in the next year to be, I guess, enrolled into a Bachelor of Statistics and Biology. You'll probably think, why biology? So biology was actually wanted to kind of build on what I had planned was I really wanted to build the foundations I had in pharmacy, and build on that is getting into pharmaceutical research. Now that might lead my paths into like pharmaceutical science, research, probably like vaccine or medicine development sort of field, which I thought, hey, look, that probably sounds like the path that I really want to go to. So initially actually going into statistics, I realized, hey, it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of data. It kind of changes So I got enrolled into University of Auckland Bachelor in Science, they called it, and it's majoring in statistics and biology. And like it kind of really opened my insights in terms of how I looked at data. So before you kind of look at data as in like it's just a number, but once I actually got into stats, it kind of broken it down into it it broke it down into really segments. Like you start looking at the distribution, the skewness, the outliners of the data, and it kind of really made you realize that, hey, look, there's actually a lot more beneath the numbers itself, and there's a lot of things that's quite practical. So I guess while in the 2 years, one of the two things couple of things that I did was um, did understand quite a bit in terms of the New Zealand environment, or especially the Auckland environment in terms of the data space. So I was trying to read and looked out on a lot of the career websites in terms of what are the opportunities out there beyond, I guess, beyond finishing the degree. And I guess there was, at that time, I realized that there was some data analyst roles and BI consultant roles. And I guess and at the end of that 2 years, I was really fortunate that there was an opportunity open up for our internship position at Vero Insurance, which is one of the Suncorp brands that owns like commercial, personal, and like life insurance. And I was actually quite lucky to be part of that because that was quite competitive, and it was one of the first years that Suncorp took the opportunity to open up for internship. Um, and I guess this kind of, I'll go back to the slide. Um, so it kind of brings me into, I guess, the first. So how I've sliced this presentation is that I've got some like takeaways here, and hopefully these will lead into and kind of pique your interest and your thinkings around getting into data, or are you thinking about potentially changing careers and potentially moving into data as well. So I guess the first thing is really, like I said, getting is knowing what triggers you. For me, like I said, data was something that I enjoyed. And more actually in particular was the statistics. Look, statistics was something that I enjoyed at high school alongside chemistry. But once I actually got into the degree in statistics, I realized, hey, look, there is so much beyond the just merely a number and stat. It was kind of a lot of underlying things that was quite interesting. I think the first thing, I guess my takeaway here is in that, for me, in that gap here, is that what you have to really plan out, well, I planned out is what really excites me and what I really don't like doing. So I guess one of the things in pharmacy, which I didn't really quite enjoy, was kind of the repetitiveness. It's kind of like dispensing the medicine. You kind of get into that sort of rhythm, which I didn't really find enjoyable. However, really enjoy the patient and the customer interactions, which I guess that was, you got to really find out what triggers and what are some of the things that motivate and stimulate you. And that really helped me in terms of, I guess, helping me to select, hey, right, Bachelor of Science in Statistics is something that I will try for. Because I know that there was going to be opportunities in data analysis and, I guess, BI consultancy. The next thing is embracing the change and plan and replan. That's something that's interesting because this kind of leads up to the next part, which I'll jump back in, is so where I left off is, so I got luckily the role to become an intern at Vero Insurance as a data analyst intern. And I guess that was my first taste of going into kind of corporate environments for data analysis. Look, that was a really, really big eye opener. Everything was new. I think the only kind of thing that I could take in terms of what I had learned before was the way and kind of the ability to kind of communicate and establish rapport with people. Besides that, I think everything else, besides that soft skill, everything else was learning on the spot. One of my recommendations is, I said, plan and replan. One of the things is, when I was an intern, so every day, everything was new. I literally had no understanding what is SQL, what's a group by, what's an order by. But it was actually just trying to take these little small strides. So every single morning, and at every single night, what I'll do is, in the morning, I'll make a list of top 3 things I want to learn. And at night, I'll have to reflect whether I learned that or not. Obviously, sometimes you don't get to do those things you want to learn. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But nonetheless, it is important to know that learning on the job is quite key. So keeping that really open-mindedness was one of the big things. I also put plan and replan. So part of that is, don't be afraid if things don't go your way, because obviously with priorities, with changing directions, strategy, there's a lot of things that I guess you wouldn't expect, but I guess embrace it with motivation and positivity, because what I had felt that I wasn't really quite, I guess, adjusted to the agile works with like stand-ups, with the various agile ceremonies. But then I guess I was actually quite lucky at that time. Is my manager, she was quite, she actually she knew that I was quite junior in the team, and she signed me up to whatever opportunities there was. So whatever there was a presentation or showcase opportunity, like, she would just sign me up. So essentially, I remember for my first presentation, I had to repeat it for like 5 times for probably 5 different sets of audience. I'm sure the audience probably got probably sleepy and tired by the end of all those presentations, but I guess it kind of really is really building that sort of confidence and making sure that you know what to work on. Reflection is definitely key. So say, for example, once you complete the presentation or you've done a report showcase, you kind of have to reflect on what I really did well, and what do I think that I still need to improve on. But one of the big things is actually having someone to talk to on that. So that manager that I had, she was really supportive. She was really in a mentor state. Is that I would talk to her and kind of have those catch up to say, hey, look, what did you think I did for that report? What sort of things can I do better? Always seek for feedback. I think that's one of the key things, and that will really stimulate your growth. But don't take negative feedback in the negative manner, which I felt was kind of one of the big changes for me. Is when someone said, obviously, right, your report is just showing a few numbers, but it doesn't really show what's driving it, what's the trend. Don't take it as in like in a negative fashion, as in, oh crap, I didn't really do well, but actually look at it, change that sort of perspective and change it in the light of, hey, right, there's another opportunity. Maybe I need to do more reading. What are some of the analysis? What are some of the insights? Do I need to do some potential data science in there to investigate what are some of the predictive analytics I can do in there? So it's actually keeping that mindfulness and understanding, can I plan and can I actually investigate and research and actually get more detailed and actually plan that sort of learning? So that was definitely key for me. Back to the slide, which you guys probably just saw everything. Sorry, I just have to keep on swapping between the two. So I guess the first thing was getting to know your triggers, embrace change and plan and replan. So obviously nothing will kind of there would be a lot of instances where you think that, hey, this week I want to tackle these top 3 items or on a particular day. But sometimes don't be disheartened that you'll get one thing tackled. But hey, look at it in the longer term. If you can tackle one thing in one day or 1 week, and if you stack that up months and weeks down, that is actually a lot of learning and a lot of growth. So having that positive, and I guess that growth mindset is one of the key areas. Data and support system, and get started there. So this leads up into my next part, is over here. So after kind of 2 years in the data analyst journey, that's when I realized that, hey, look, there was the development side behind BI and looking after data warehousing and looking at the ETL processes. Hey, that's really appealing to me because obviously I don't really know that. And I really want to get into that sort of detail. So at that particular time, I made the decision to say, hey, look, potentially data engineering is something I wanted to go into. However, I was a bit lucky, is that that's when Genesis was looking for a BI consultant role. So essentially that role was to look after the whole Power BI service at Genesis. And I was actually quite lucky to get that role because, again, if I reflect on my strengths, I had a lot of analytical experience and looking at Tableau at Vera Insurance. And that was kind of a bit of a seamless transition over into Power BI at Genesis. So I was looking after the whole Power BI sort of implementation, governance, if there's troubleshooting, kind of looking at it from that perspective. So that was kind of kick-started my journey in Genesis as actually initially as the BI consultant. But as the BI consultant, I think you never become restricted by your JD. Because I guess I was hired to look after the Power BI service and the reporting in the enterprise, but I never restricted myself to just look after Power BI. So I was getting my hands dirty. I was understanding what Azure SQL data, or back in the day it was called Azure SQL Data Warehouse. I was trying to understand what is that? How do I set up data pipelines? How do I set up SSIS packages and projects? It's kind of having that inquisitive mind and actually getting that space and having that talk with your managers to say, can I take on a little bit more? Because I really want to grow that aspect. Again, I was quite fortunate. My manager was really good. And he gave me those opportunities to not only look after Power BI, but also Power BI service, but also look into setting up some ETL pipelines and actually understanding more from the data platform perspective. And that kind of really piqued my really big interest in terms of the data engineering world. And I guess from that, that was back in 2018. So in 2019 was when I transitioned into the data engineer role. So that was it was actually the senior data engineer role. So what I had, I guess, wanted to do was not only able to kind of like set up the technical aspect, but also is actually doing a bit of the teaching as well and mentoring as well. So I had to actually work and onboard a few new staffs at that time to say what are some of the best practices we can do. One of the big things in data is always look for opportunities to make things better. There's always something to make things better. And I think that's one of the key things is that mindset is I never changed that from back in uni is always look at something that, hey, can I change my learning pattern? Can I change something, change my tactical in terms of should I be learning a little bit more in terms of cognitive services in Azure? So it's kind of having that growth mindset to not limit yourself on the learning aspects. So that was one of the key areas for me. Obviously really enjoyed the mentorship and the teaching aspect when I was in the senior data engineer role, and really fortunate at that time is that there was a leadership position open up for the chapter lead role, and that's when I guess the chapter lead role started for me, and it was a lot of challenges because I guess it was my first leadership role, and there was a lot of items to understand that you kind of really needed to put your team out there before yourself, which was the big takeaway I had. And since just really enjoyed it because the ability to kind of coach and teach your team is really paramount, and strong leadership and data is just an absolute must. One of the key things that I always share with my data engineering team is that always look, again, it's kind of a repetition of what I just said, is always look for opportunities to make things better. Just because you've set up a pipeline that say for example takes 2 hours to run, can we trim it down? Can we trim it down to, say for example, 30 minutes? Can we drive efficiency? Can we drive cost efficiency? So always look for those sort of opportunity and giving the team that sort of room to actually brainstorm and talk and collaborate and actually find things where they think that, hey, I think we can do much better. We can trim down this pipeline execution. We can make this platform run a little bit faster. So actually, really keeping those sort of doors open. That was one of the key things in the current leadership position that I really enjoy, is kind of building that team culture, and really kind of getting everyone in that collaborative sense to actually work together. Back into the slide again. So knowing the support system and getting started there. Switching that. So knowing the support system. Now, I didn't really touch a little bit more on this. Actually, just giving some advice here is in data, because it's a very, very much evolving field, is that there's new technologies, there's new architecture patterns, and there's new cloud platforms coming out. Is to actually keep up to date with this. There's a few, I'll give you a few tips around how I kind of, got up to speed and actually really refresh your learnings. So obviously, hopefully everyone uses LinkedIn. Usually there's a lot of good posts on LinkedIn around tech savvy people around. You see Will on the line, who sends quite a bit of Cosmos DB information, which is really useful. Is to actually get across and actually learn some of these technologies as they kind of as people start kind of posting them out, is really knowing what's out there. And the second thing is actually getting like some sort of free subscription like that Microsoft Office, is getting in there and start playing around with that. Nothing beats in terms of some hands-on experience. You don't have to build a proper platform or pipeline, but getting in there and actually just having that feel around how things work is really key. And I guess, again, in the cloud space, is a lot of the information in the cloud space is quite transferable, whether we're talking about like virtual networks and all that sort of, a lot of these concepts are quite transferable between like Google, Amazon, and Azure. So once you actually learn the foundational works, it's actually quite easy to actually reuse that information elsewhere. I guess something that I was actually quite lucky to be kind of kind of a chaotic part was COVID last year. Obviously, we were in a bit of a 2 months lockdown in New Zealand. So really took that time to actually plan out my learnings. So one thing that we had is Azure Certifications. Now, that's a really, really great area to start in planning your learning, whether it's in the data engineering space or solution architecture. So part of that time, I was actually planning quite a few certificates to take. Obviously, it's a lot of learning after work from Azure, documentations, Microsoft, learning about different patterns. So having that bit of that learning plan and consistent learning mindset is quite key in data, because the current landscape that we have potentially could change in like 1 or 2 years. No one can guarantee that it's going to stay static. I think the only thing that's going to not change is change. And I guess that brings me to the last part, was actually just a bit of summarize, is the change is a journey and not a destination. If you actually reflect, or if I actually reflect on myself in terms of how I started in pharmacy, and I guess all the changes that I've been through, is never really limit yourself in terms of what you think that, hey, I don't think I can do that, but actually really think about what are your strengths? What are the things that you're really passionate about? Have you got a growth mindset, which I think is a really key thing, because I guess once you have a growth mindset, really nothing is kind of really can stop you. There's a lot of, it's going to be, growth mindset obviously involves, I guess, change management. Obviously change is, you have to spend a lot of energy for change, but actually if you actually get through change, and at the end of that, you do realize there's a lot more that you've gained through the journey. So always take it as a positive light. I guess that's one of my, I guess, recommendations, is don't limit yourself. And I think this actually wraps up my presentation. I was wondering if, Hamish, if there's anyone online. I know we're a little bit early. Happy to take a few questions if there is.
Well, since Hamish is on mute, I will take this. There are people online. Actually, and there's some great feedback in the chat, and I couldn't agree more. I've basically been sitting here for the last half hour, just nodding some super important messages out there. And what I really liked, you weren't giving a lecture, but you were telling a story, and the way you did that, telling a story through Power BI. Catherine also mentioned that in the chat. That was a very smart way of doing that. That was actually presented perfect. So, Rob Sewell is asking a question. So the question from Rob is, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago, knowing what you know now?
Oh, wow. What advice I would give 10 years ago compared to now? Wow, that's a I don't know how to answer. Like seriously, like a decade ago, I would not realize or really fathom to know that myself will be in data. But I guess it was more the fact that if you're not really happy, I guess one of the more motivations back to when I was in the pharmacy field was I found that there was a lot of mundaneness on the work, and that was kind of a bit of a motivation in terms of for me to actually kickstart and change my career and do something about it. I think one of the big things is, would you rather settle for something or would you want to change something? And I guess there's two types of change. This is kind of like an analogy. Would you want to change? It's kind of like an interesting analogy. Is one of the biggest things that help you to change is if you've got a dog that's coming to chase you, trying to gut your butt. Obviously, you'll try to run, you'll try to change. And I guess that if I kind of think that back to pharmacy, it's obviously not a dog. It's not a ferocious dog. It's not going to bite me, not like my little pup over there. It's actually enough motivation for me to realize, hey, this is actually not really what I wanted for my longer term. I don't see my career progressing that much. But keeping that mindfulness in terms of, is there something out there that I can actually do better? But don't think as in like I have to be in data, or data is something, or data engineering is something that's my end destination. It's kind of like what I said is have that sort of goal, but knowing like on the diagram you see over here, the ribbon chart, is that nothing is going to be static. There's going to be things that's going to be, you're going to be crazy. It's probably some things that's not even going to be on this chart. Coming from a complete medical field over into data, that's just, but just don't limit yourself. That's having that growth mindset. Is one little setback or a few setbacks doesn't mean that it changes your whole perspective in terms of where you want to get to. Always try to tweak and reshuffle like this. I guess again, back on this chart, is the destination is always here. It never really matters how you get there, but don't have too much emphasis on the destination itself. Do enjoy the moment. Do enjoy the moment and the journey as well. Obviously, it can be quite difficult. It can be painful. It could be a lot of late nights. It could be a lot of sleepless nights thinking about your presentation, about reporting, around analytics. How do you actually, and platform support and all that. But hey, look, everything is, as long as you have that warm fuzzy to know, hey, look, I enjoy this field. Just go all out for it.
Nice. I finally worked out how to unmute myself on Teams.
I was going to say, if we had asked Hamish what he would have taught himself 10 years ago, it would be how to mute and unmute yourself in online meetings. I will actually have to revisit the recording of this session because there's so many great quotes in there. This is brilliant. Before we go to the next question from Will, may I please remind everyone, please provide feedback to Hubert. I'm sure he will appreciate that. Even though I'm sure it will all be amazing feedback, but maybe you found something that stood out for you, please let him know. Hamish, are you going to take Will's question?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to take Will's question because I won't be able to answer it.
You know what I mean. Come on. Do I have to mute you again?
Yeah, I think there's a question here from Catherine. How did you find and build your network support community? And what sort of advice would you give to others coming from other industries and who don't really know many people on this side? Hey, that's a really good and I guess difficult question as well. So back at I was actually quite fortunate when I was doing the Bachelor of Science in Statistics. Is Auckland University has some good relationships with some of the, I guess, a lot of enterprise and corporations out there around New Zealand. And obviously in there's a few data centric or data teams in there. Going to these spheres and taking that time to understand around what that company does and what they're trying to build in their data team, that's really one of the big things. Obviously, what really kick-started my learning and kind of growing that network, I know this is another repetition, is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a really great area, not only for kind of connecting with like-minded people in the data space, but obviously with recruiters as well. There's a lot of recruiters out there that look for, I guess it's not really, they have different caliber of talents that they want, but you never know if they need someone that has some data experience that also is probably expertise in the health sector, which you can have these sort of overlaps, and you never know where that sort of opportunity can open up. So I guess that's one of the things. And I guess besides that is having that good network within the company. So when I was back at Vero and currently at Genesis, building that sort of relationship outside of your data domain is key. Everyone thinks that data is important and it can change a lot of things, but if the business doesn't really understand when they're looking at a number, what the number means, what sort of insights they can get out of it, it doesn't really make much sense. So building that network and building that sort of that data, ingraining that sort of data thinking in terms of the business is quite key. So always keep that network open within the company as well. And I guess for New Zealand, there's also look out for these communities. Like we do have, I think there's a data ops meetup group. Do sign yourself up to these sort of sessions. There is quite a few people, whether they come from technical or product ownership. They can, I guess, pass a lot of good information that way. Hopefully that answers your question, Catherine.
I don't know about Catherine, but it certainly did for me. It was fantastic. I'm just saying what Catherine says. Yay! Thanks, Catherine. Question from a good mate of ours, Will Valida. Would you ever want to go full circle and combine data engineering with your pharmacy experience? Thank you, Will, for putting that question in. And anyone else who wants to put one in, please do put in a question.
Thanks, Will. I think that kind of really relays back to that kind of that radial chart I had shown before. Is that changes? It's a funny thing because you never know where you end up once you get into data. And I think my understanding is that data is going to get very niche in terms of specializations across different fields. There's a lot of, I guess, you do see that there's a lot of specialists in data that specializes in the health industry, and obviously in utilities and insurance. But there is a lot of extra elements of data engineering with health that overlap. Say, for example, mortality rates, morbidity, and from that, like kind of linking back to what we currently have with the COVID outbreak right now, is that you can start doing some really smart things in terms of predictive analytics. Say, for example, how effectiveness are you looking at these vaccination rates? So I'm sure, like, say, for example, these 4 p.m. Announcements that New Zealand gets every Monday afternoon, there must be some sort of data analytics and data engineering works behind that to analyze and do some sort of forecasting. So once you actually get to the data, but actually becoming niched in certain areas is quite key as well. For me, I think one of the good things is I've become kind of a guru in terms of kind of medicine experience. So wherever a company I work for, I kind of say to people, hey, look, if you need any pharmaceutical advice, do reach out. I'm good to give you that sort of advice. And actually, none of these really experiences come out as a cost to you. They only come out to a benefit to you. Like, say, for example, for medicine, I can still understand epidemiology, pharmaceutical, how medicines work. And there's a lot of, I guess, overlaps between pharmaceutical research and data, because obviously that has to rely on data and data engineering. So there's natural intersections there, but it's not actually, when I actually say kind of link back to the changes, you go through that journey, doesn't mean that all your past gets forgotten, and it just becomes kind of you get thrown in on the side, but actually it's think of as like a building block. It really expands out your horizontal experience, and that does not kill any of your opportunities. And I guess to answer that, I'll definitely not restrict myself with I guess if there's any opportunities in like I guess health and data. I think Rob's got a question. Would you do anything differently? Good question. I guess if I actually think back, it's kind of like thinking around. It's hard to. It's always easier to think about retrospectively how I could have done something. Say, for example, maybe I should have done pharmacy, or maybe I should have started in statistics. But hey, look, if I think back, there is so much things that I can grab from pharmacy, like working with customers, building that sort of soft skills in terms of communication. There is so much element that I would rather say that I did a degree in pharmacy and then change degrees rather than say I just wanted to go into data from day one and I was so passionate about it. Yeah, I think that's it's hard to predict, but don't think that there's any experience that's just useless. Everything comes with benefits.
It's probably the quote of the night.
I'm still trying to figure out what the quote of the night is, because again, so many great quotes. I think my favorite still is "Don't limit yourself," because that also kind of really matches the theme of this whole event, getting people on, well, quote unquote stage, because
yeah,
getting people in front of their desk where they've been sitting all week anyway. No, that doesn't sound right either. But getting people out of your comfort zones and make them realize, and I think not just this event, but also lots of other events that started doing these newcomer tracks and so on. It showed how many great people we have out there once they really take that step and get out of, like I said, their comfort zone. So yeah, I think not to limit yourself, that would probably be my quote of the night. But we can make that a competition. I can set up like a doodly form and everyone can choose their favorite quote. I'm pretty sure there will be about 100 of them out of just today's. I will probably have to rewatch the recording 2 or 3 times to let that all sink in. That was,
I think one thing
brilliant.
Yeah, thanks. I guess one of the things is that comfort zone is it's definitely not easy getting outside of that comfort zone. But I think one thing that really ties into that is failure. I think the current society, and I guess people do feel like a failure does translate to a complete sort of failure. But I guess it's probably just a bit cliched now, is that these failures actually feed back into your learnings and how you can do things better. If you don't fail, then you never know that you know that you're definitely not moving and you're definitely staying static. So that was, I guess, back at pharmacy that I realized, hey, I wasn't failing anything. I was actually becoming an expert in everything that I do. Not that I was a machine or anything like that, but it was more like you kind of really know things with half eye closed, that you really know how things work. But that was like, I'm too comfortable. Maybe I need to move on, sort of thing. And that's kind of like something that's kind of brought across the journey.
I don't think that's cliche at all. A couple of years back, I had the pleasure to watch a keynote by Sir Richard Branson, founder of the Virgin Group, Virgin Records, Virgin Movies, Virgin Galactic, and so on. And he was telling that story, how he had, I think at that point, don't quote me on the number, I think it was more than 350 companies that he founded that went bankrupt. And I think from a entrepreneurial perspective, if your company goes bankrupt, that can certainly be seen as some kind of failure. Still, if you look at this man's net worth, so from a pure financial perspective, but also from what he has created in jobs, in values, in innovations and stuff. I would not say this man failed in general. So I don't think it's cliche at all to say that failure is good, because that's what you learn from. Sometimes in a hard and disappointing way, like me taking 4 days to set up an OpenShift cluster this week, which should have taken me 2 hours, just because, well, stupid things in tech. But more on a more general, I think that is exactly the point. And another thing that you've pointed out is how important it was for you over the course of your journey to have the right support from managers, from mentors, and I think that is also very great.
Yeah.
Find people that are supportive, find leaders that are supportive, and once you are in that leader's role, give back and be supportive, and don't be hey, I'm your boss, you do what I say, in a condescending way.
And absolutely ask for feedback. So that's one of the key things. If you don't, especially if you're really, I guess not even at the early phases of your journey is in your career, is always ask for feedback. That's what I still do with my boss, is always think that, is there something that I can do different or better, or like asking that feedback. There's nothing worse than not asking for feedback. And that's what I ask from my current team as well. Like, what do you think I can do better, guys?
I think, though, it helps if you have an appreciative manager, or rather a manager who is not in the 1980s, because I once worked for someone. If I asked for feedback, they were of the dictatorial type management style of, you know, the late 1980s, what have you. And it actually, for me, I was a middle manager at the time. And so what happened was the really horrible way that my manager treated me, it actually made me treat my staff or team members a lot better, because I didn't want them to be subjected to what I was. So I think it's a two-way thing, because you need someone who is very in tune with giving constructive feedback, as opposed to someone who might not.
Yeah, I completely agree, Hamish. I don't know if you guys seen the how they structure in terms of support network in a corporation when they have a pyramid, and obviously you have the I guess the frontline staff, and you have the management, and you have the execs and the C-suite. But there's a bit of and that's kind of the pyramid sort of state. But there's a bit of a shift in momentum in terms of actually flipping it over. You kind of have these. The biggest change and empowerment and the really momentum and machine in the company is actually the workers and the frontline staff that brings all the thoughts and the thinkings and the deliveries. So that's why there's a bit of a shift in leadership where they call it servant leadership. So rather than becoming dictatorship, you become a servant. You foster people's growth, and you actually support them. You have their back, and that's I guess the servant leadership is something that's I guess people are more transitioning in terms of what I've seen in the leadership space.
Oh, I completely agree. It's a very thin line between someone simply not being constructive in the way they provide feedback and a workplace quickly becoming toxic. Hey, friends of Hamish. By the way, super hilarious how Hamish at first tried to just hide them by putting his arm in the right way, and then he realized, okay, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that, and then just went off camera for a sec. Nice try. This is me providing constructive feedback to Hamish's hiding people skills.
Sorry.
Hey, I think we don't have any more questions there. Is there any? All right.
You might have a question very soon. Go on, Rob.
Rob, you can also just come off mute if you want.
Yeah, you guys, I guess, yeah, definitely. I'll just stop sharing.
Good evening, folks.
Hello, Rob.
Hey, look at that. 3 wonderful Southern Hemisphere people and Ben. So, thank you, Hubert. That's an
and awesome, Catherine.
Awesome presentation. This was really interesting. I think the question perhaps that springs to mind for the sake of having a conversation is, how do you know what language to learn? I'm talking SQL, Python, PowerShell, KQL, etc.
Yeah. It's well. Oh, I'm just hearing slight feedback. Let's see if I can something on my side. That's I guess one of the key questions, right? And that really ties back into there's several folds of I guess answering that. Is one of the things that we do is you got to look at the tech stack that you use. Like say for example, for us, we use quite a bit of a consumer in the Azure space. Obviously, it's like obviously SQL is a must in the data world. It's just the bread and butter. I don't think that's going to change. T-SQL, PL SQL, that's not really going to change. But for us, which has been as a kind of what I really say with the team is to become an all-rounder data engineer, you have to be quite good with, I guess, in terms of more on the code-based CI/CD. So whether it's ability to do some PowerShell, you don't have to become. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to become an expert in PowerShell. Mr. Google, Stack Overflow. There's a lot of all these great resources, right?
I don't have to be an expert in PowerShell. Oh.
Yeah. You don't. I think that's the thing. I don't think anyone needs to become an absolute SME in one area because, like I said, the technology is always changing. But one of the things that is quite important is keeping researching up to date to see what are the hot trends out there is for the languages. Like say, for example, Python's #1. I don't know if R is still #2. I'm just going to ignore that comment from Will on VB. So I'm not really sure because I think that will be kind of decommissioned.
Now careful. Now you're on thin ice. You're about to get booted from the session. Just saying. This is your first and only strike.
Okay. So there's a second strike, get kicked out, right? Yeah. It's definitely doing those sort of research, like I said, like Python, R, and SQL. In terms of programming language, well, yeah, if you count them as programming languages, is that in the data space, they're definitely the top 3, 4. PowerShell and KSQL, these are things that, like, again, in my thinking, is you don't have to become an expert. Look, in the other day, I had to write something in PowerShell that was like scaling up and down the automatically scaling up and down the Azure Synapse pool DWUs. And I was like, I have no idea how I do that. Let me just find on Google how someone does that. And actually but the thing is, when I do that sort of thing, I don't really say, right, this is the final answer. I actually start sharing with the rest of the guys in my chapter and say, hey guys, what do you think about this? Something interesting in PowerShell that we can do on this. And you never know. Someone might say, oh, yep, I had read on PowerShell doing it this way. Maybe why using Azure automation accounts? There's keep the doors open and start communicating and building. It's kind of linking back to that community, right? That's where I'm quite enjoyable in the chapter role, is that I share a lot of these, whether it's learning, training, and new things with the chapter, and getting everyone's sort of feedback in terms of, there's nothing worse than having a meeting and no one's asking any question, and it's like, yeah, I'm happy, it's all good. That's when I'm saying that something's not right. Someone has to have a question, or there has to be something, unless it means no one's learned anything and no one's taken it away. Oh, hey, Hamish's friend back in the ground.
There's another question.
Yeah. There's another question, but there's one more thing, Rob. I think you really do have to be a PowerShell expert, because if you and you may be the exception to what Hubert said, but if you're not a PowerShell expert, who am I going to ask? I mean, I'm not going to Google stuff, because it's so much. Because if you Google stuff, you still have to convert it to your own use case. If you just ping Rob, you will basically get the final solution. So, I mean, that's much easier. But to Gopi, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. If not, terribly sorry. Currently, they're working as a data engineer and would like to step into data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Could you advise them what are things that they need to know and learn to get there?
Yeah, I guess they kind of really have that one step in the door in that space. I think the best thing is really learning on the job. Have that open conversation with your manager and say, can you do, or say for example, a secondment, or kind of do work alongside the data science team and actually work alongside them for like probably a few days a week. I don't know how that arrangement can happen, but ask for that sort of opportunities, because you never really know what the best practice is until you actually get into that field and actually start playing around and knowing and working alongside the people and listening to those sort of jargons and conversations. Because the thing is, if I go into data science, I think I've got nowhere to start if I actually really start saying I don't really know where to start. But the key is, can I actually work with the data science chapter and say, can I listen to a few of your stand-ups and let me think about and let me get started there. And like, I guess that's where you can really kickstart that sort of work. Unless it's very difficult to start planning. I'm really into the kind of get your hands dirty sort of thing, roll up the sleeve and get the hands dirty. I see Catherine online. Catherine, we have to really say with you is thank you for your blogs on the ADF pipelines. You had some really nice blogs on that space, which obviously Mr. Google helped us direct over.
Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, it was definitely useful. Just realized we got 1 minute, or actually 9 o'clock bang on my time. Are we, like, is there any other questions that people have? See a few levers already. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah!